Okay, so we're in Trader John's.
Yeah, we're in Trader John's, and
When did you?
see my new haircut?
It's nice. Very nice.
Pat did a nice job.
When did you come to Pensacola and start going to this bar?
Oh my God, it was very shortly. I got here in September of '73 into Pensacola to be with the Blues because they were just getting the airplanes. They hadn't seen them yet, but they knew they were getting the A4 after they lost all those airplanes in just a few months before, all the Phantoms, the F4 Phantoms. And so anyhow, my job was introduce them to the airplane, do some training, and then be a part of the modifications of the airplane so that they could fly them in demonstration flights, or what they call precision maneuvers. And you don't call it acrobatics, because it's
Right.
not. It's precision maneuvers. That's what they want to use. So anyhow, I arrived here in September, and they took me everywhere. I mean, the guys, they were just so good and just neat people, just wonderful people. And they took me to all the places where they have dinner. They took me, and of course, Trader John's is one of the first places you go when you go to Pensacola. If you have anything to do with the Navy,
Right.
naval aviation,
I think
you
I
go
was
to
even
Trader
in it
John's.
at one time.
Huh?
I think I even went there at one time. I remember very little about it, but I do remember going.
Yeah. And of course, when you get introduced to Trader, and he's always got a big smile.
Right.
And okay, Jimmy, listen, can I buy you a drink? And I said, well, you own the bar, Trader. Yeah, I guess so. So, and for the longest time, sometimes he would buy me a drink and I wouldn't, and he'd say, no. Other times when he was near the cash register, you didn't ask for a drink near the cash register because he'd take money. And he was always near the cash register. But he was a kick. Anyhow, you meet a lot of very important naval aviators, astronauts, and the chief of naval operations. I remember some of those guys. And just everybody would come in there. And ladies, of course, he treated them well, even though he had dancers over in one corner and a little band playing. But Trader had, everybody wanted to bring something to him.
Right.
Everybody. I mean, all these airplanes that you see up here on the ceiling, that's just a drop in a bucket to what he had on the ceiling in Trader John's itself. And I have to tell you, as neat as that place was, it wasn't so neat in the bathroom. You can imagine.
Yeah.
But people just didn't mind because they just loved being with Trader and all those people.
Right.
So he became quite a fixture in the community because he was always doing something for people. And he knew everybody. So anyhow, as we went along, I think I was only here about 3 or 4 weeks before I had to go back to the factory and review what they were designing to change in the airplane. I told you some of that when we were over there at the Naval Aviation Museum. Like the drag chute for short field landings, and the in-flight refueling capability, the inverted flight capability, is something to do with the oil, and the stick spring in the front, and the collapsible ladder that goes in the tube, 5-inch diameter tube, so they can get in and out of the airplane before they would bring anything. So I think just about every time that we came back from a show site. There were 50 of them that year in 1974. Every time we came back from the show site, Traders was probably the first place we went.
Mm-hmm.
And just to gather there, and it was kind of like a big magnet,
Right.
because of so many people would show up there, that old friends, new friends, and just the feeling of being in Traders. So I got to tell you something about something I saw in here a week or two ago when I was in here. There's a little jet, a very small jet, smallest jet airplane in the world at that time. That's BD-5, and BD was a designer, and I think it was in Pennsylvania. That's where I first saw those jets. They had a little tiny engine, a French engine, 66 pounds of thrust.
Really?
I think that's what it was, yeah.
Yeah.
But that thing was so light you could almost lift it up yourself.
Yeah. So it really went, huh?
Yeah. Then there was a time that we were flying. They always were part of the air show. There were 3 of them, and there was a time that we were flying, and we finished ours, and they went up, and there was a big guy, a real big guy. I can't remember his name now, but he was in this cockpit of this little tiny airplane, and for some reason or other, he lifted off and he couldn't get any more airspeed, and he couldn't, and so he kept coming down, and he went over a little embankment, and he crashed. And I remember seeing a big scar across here, across his upper lip.
Mm-hmm.
And as I reached down there to find out, and I was curious, and so I tried to figure out what happened. Why did that thing not get anywhere it was going? And it just turned out that they had gotten a barrel of fuel from across the way at a small fuel dump, and it was a shell station, and it had rust in it. The barrel had rust in it, and I said, well, your filters should have taken it. We don't have filter in that line. So I think they hastily found some filters for the rest of the airplanes. But they had to purge all the systems, But that was the problem. It just wasn't getting fuel. And that stuck in my mind. I thought, oh, man.
I hate it when that happens.
Yeah, and you figure out little deals like, this seems like such a small thing, but that small thing can be a major danger.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
And filtration is extremely important in any fuel system, particularly if it's a jet engine, because you got to have exact ratio. And in gasoline engines, stoichiometric would be 16-1. But
in most I'm sure you have aviation applications. What most people don't consider is with a gasoline powered engine, you're usually on the ground. You just pull over and let the engine die.
Yeah.
There's no safety issue there, really. There is, but it's not like falling out of the sky.
Yeah. Okay, so what else would you want to ask about in this?
So then we could talk about that whole period of your life in 1973 when you came here. You bought that house, right?
What? Okay, that was a strange thing, Mark, because
really?
Yeah, when I got here, of course I was in a hotel at first,
Right.
and I had a lot of luggage because I was coming out of where was I coming from? 73. It's coming from Oceana, and that's where we had that big 5-bedroom house.
Right.
Rita and kids and I, and all the kids were gone by that time, except Lisa. And so when they called me, it was like, be here yesterday. And so I didn't have any time to get ready for anything.
Right.
And Rita said, am I going? I said, no, I can't take you, because I don't know what I'm going to be doing yet. And so that was the end of that particular event. And I think that's what stopped our marriage, really, was when I left to go to the Blue Angels.
She never went?
No, she never went. And so I just had a few things with me, and I had a lot of boxes of records and things, the documents that I wanted to preserve and that I thought were important. So all that stuff was shipped down to Pensacola in the hospital, in the hotels, and it was shipped to the Blue Angels. That's what it was. And then I had to pick it up and carry it to a hotel, and it was the Sheraton over here. It's currently some apartments and condos right there on Garden Street. Anyhow, that was one of those things where every time I had to go somewhere, I had to carry all that junk with me.
Right.
I didn't have enough good sense to put it in storage somewhere.
Right.
I just didn't do it. And so I'd carry all that junk with me. And even when I was with the Blues, and for about about 4 months, I did that. And finally, I guess it was January, February, Harry Anderson called me and said, Jim, get the hell out of that hotel and buy a house. And I went to find a guy that would sell a house. And I saw a couple of really nice places that I turned it down because the driveway was sloping too deep, or a beautiful place for a song, maybe $30,000. And then he said, I know what you're doing. He said, I got one right there at Navy Point, right outside the gate, and you can have that one for $13,750.
Wow.
And so that's the one I bought.
Yeah.
And you remember that house in Payne
yeah.
Road, 315 Payne Road. Well, I was in and out of there all the time, but I no longer had to carry my junk with me. It was fortunate.
Yeah.
I don't think I actually got into that house until after we got back from El Centro. And El Centro we went in February and left there end of March, beginning of April. And, after all the training. And that's when I got into that house, sometime in April, I guess. So I thought I had a pretty good deal. A lot of stuff to be done on that house, but
How old was the house when you bought it?
It was built in 1946, and it was Navy housing.
Was it?
Yeah, it was Navy housing, and all of those houses were built about that time, 45, 46, 47.
Right.
And you can see the bricks are strange size, big size. And that'll tell you what time frame they were built. So anyhow, I was on the road all the time after that. Every time they had to go to a show site, I'd go with them. And I remember the first couple of show sites, I did carry that stuff, a lot of the stuff with me in Fat Albert. And finally, the maintenance officer said, what do you got in there anyhow? I said, junk. He said, why don't you leave it home? Well, I don't have a place to put it. I don't have a house yet. So, that was a couple of months, a month or so. I don't know. I get a little vague on what the time frame was. But eventually, I did get that house, and I stashed all that stuff. But the one thing I wanted to tell you about Fat Albert was everybody in the crew, and they'd only leave a skeleton crew back at the Naval Air Station. But whenever they had a show site, we'd all jump into Fat Albert except the birds that were going to be flying, the A4s. And of course they'd get there before Fat Albert did in a lot of cases. Sometimes we went first. But we'd have an engine in the middle of the airplane, a replacement engine, and all the guys would sit on the sides in these canvas seats. And all your luggage that you were going to be there for maybe 3 days at a time.
Yeah.
And then sometimes if you were going to go from there to another place, like in the West Coast, you'd go about 4 different places in a row before you come home.
No vehicles? They didn't bring any vehicles in the plane?
We rent.
Just rent?
Yeah, they always rented the cars. So they always gave me one special. I never had to arrange to get my own vehicle. They did it for me. So anyhow, in that Rochester thing, that was, I think Rochester was the first air show we went to in '74. And I remember they said, okay, well, let's all jump in this airplane. It was a Grumman Widgeon, this little flying boat. I don't know if you've ever seen those. Oh, it's really, really neat.
Yeah.
Twin engine. And a high wing. And this flying boat. And you're sitting in the boat and the water's right here. Look out the window and there's the water.
Right.
Cool, man. And so, anyhow, I remember the guy that owned that airplane. There were about 4 or 5 of us in the airplane, and they let me go. And the objective was to check the center point of where the dignitaries were going to be in the bleachers or something like that along the river. And so that was, we flew up and down and said, okay, here's where we do this, here's where we do this, here's where we do this.
So everyone can see it.
Yeah, it's just making sure that you have all those checkpoints. And taking off to get there, here we're taking off, and the river wasn't that wide where we were, but it was nice. It was kind of smooth, and so you couldn't just take off straight because you couldn't break the friction. So what he did was he headed straight for the trees, and I thought, oh my God, it's gonna hit the land. And just before he got there, he did a sharp turn to break the friction, and then off we went. Can you imagine that?
Yeah. Sounds like coming in Guantanamo Bay.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like then in my
Yeah, on a sailboat, right? Yeah. So anyhow, that was, I don't know, all the places we went. Salt Lake City, and we always got good accommodations and very nice, pleasant meals, and you know, the universities or the Chamber of Commerce or the Junior Chamber or some other major organization always was a sponsor.
Right.
And that's how we survived that.
So
So the
they'd show
guys
up with
didn't have to pay
dancing
anything.
girls.
Huh?
They'd show up with dancing girls with high school band or something.
Sometimes. Yeah, sometimes they did. But, you know, there was always the press. And one time I remember we were going up in an elevator, and this one girl in San Diego was in the press, and she had this press sign on her and all that sort of stuff. And she said, why don't you go home with me, and you don't have to go to your hotel, and I'll take you home and I'll bring you back. Okay. And, you know, I had a couple of drinks, I guess. So I went. And I slept on the couch, and next morning I remember getting up, you know, all my clothes on, and
all of the rings?
I went to see if there's any coffee. She wasn't up yet. And I'm seeing a billfold wide open with $100 bills in it. thinking, what's this girl trying to tell me?
Apparently she forgot to tell you.
So, yeah, right.
Yeah.
So I had to get out of there quick. So anyhow, that was a strange event,
Yeah.
Mark. I didn't know what to do about that one. So let me see what else we did.
So how long a period of time were you with them?
I went to every show site, 50 show sites in 1974, and then we came back in November, did the final show here in November, and then they kind of took off for the holidays, for the Christmas holidays, and I was working away in January, February sometime, and we hadn't gone back out to El Centro yet, so I got a phone call, and that's when Harry said, "Jim, we got airplanes going to Guantanamo, and I can't get anybody to go. Would you go there for 5 months?" And I thought, why are they doing this to me? They're throwing me into the briar patch again. And so I
This
said,
was what year?
"This is 75.
75.
75, yeah." So anyhow, I was easy, too easy. I should have stayed with the blues. But I said, okay, I'll tell you what, get Dale Speck, take my place, and tell him he's going to be here for 5 months, and then I'm taking over again.
Mm-hmm.
And so I get to Gitmo, and Dale had been working with me on the Forrestal, when we got the A4 Charlie airplanes and one of the cruises we had, and they had all the electronics gear that I didn't know about. So Dale took care of that. He was an electrical engineer. Anyhow, as it turned out, I went to Gitmo, and of course they were all happy to see me, and they needed some help. They had F-8 Crusaders at the time, and every month, I stayed there for the 5 months, and the airplanes still weren't there, and so they'd say, "Mr. Crumlish, would you stay another month?" In the meantime, I'm training and doing all those things and getting ready.
You're trying to get the maintenance people up to speed on a plane that's not there.
Yeah, right. So, but I knew the airplane pretty well at that time.
Yeah, but I mean, you can't
And they
show
didn't.
them.
And they were trying to maintain an old fighter, and so this little attack airplane was something new and fresh.
Mm-hmm.
So anyhow, 5 months go by, and I'm still there, and I'm getting kind of anxious, and I want to go back. And so they come to me and they say, "Mr. Crumlish, airplanes are due here next month. Would you stay another month? If you think you need me." Okay, 1 month. And that happened about 4 or 5 times before I finally realized I wasn't going back.
You're not coming back.
And I thought, oh boy, what have I got myself into here?
Yeah.
Just being a nice guy and saying, yeah, I'll do it. Oh
Right.
boy. But anyhow, as it turned out, that was a marvelous experience,
Opportunity.
just being there.
You were there for how many years?
I was there a little over 8 years as the Douglas aircraft rep, about 8.5 years. And then after that, I was sent to Corpus Christi, and I did not like where I was living. Not Corpus Christi, but at Kingsville, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
I did not like where I was living. I was in a small apartment, and I was working every day, long hours. Didn't realize that I was going to be, that I could have stayed at Corpus Christi, which is much nicer.
Right.
And so that's when I got in touch with Polly, and I said, okay, Polly, I'm going to retire in February.
But you were hanging around with Polly in Guantanamo Bay. We were
Yeah.
there in 1981.
Yeah. So anyhow, I met her when she first got to Gitmo '79, and she was assigned to work with me with the U.S. Naval Sea Cadet program.
Was she in the military? What was
No, she was a teacher.
Yeah, I know, but how'd she get there?
Department of Defense Dependent Schools, DODS. And those people have schools all over the world.
Right.
Wherever there's a base,
Yeah. You need
where there are
teachers and
kids.
you need kids.
yeah, you need teachers. And so that's what they have. With almost every base that America has all over the world. And you'd be amazed at how many. Air Force, Navy,
Oh, sure.
you know.
Figure in NATO and all those places.
Well, some of those that were not military, they had American school, what they call American school in Beirut, American school in Stuttgart or wherever it was, or American school in Tokyo. And that's where the embassy people would send their kids. Embassy and other civilian organizations. So, anyhow,
So you were already, let's go back a minute. You were already divorced from Rita at that stage?
Yeah. I had been, like
What
from
year was that?
73 to about 78, 79.
You were married? Okay.
I was still married to her, but I was not, legally married to her, but I was not with her. I was not with her. And
So that was official that you
in '73 it was over.
right,
When I went to the Blues, that canceled everything.
right.
But I knew Rita could take care of herself because she had all kinds of capabilities, and particularly with hospitals, administration, things like that. She
Right.
was very, very good at that. Who's this?
So then you got divorced in what, 78? Is that what you said officially?
Somewhere around, no, I think it was about 80.
About 80.
About,
Okay.
Yeah, about 98,
Okay.
1980.
Because
I think
when I
that's
first
what it
knew
was.
Mary Ann, Rita was still kind of in your life some.
Yeah, but not much, because I rarely saw her. Rarely. Almost never. Anyhow,
So you met Polly.
I met Polly because she was assigned to me as a new teacher. She was going to be doing special education, and so she had pretty good rapport with kids. And so we started hanging out with Polly. After the Sea Cadet program, I started hanging out with her, and she was a pretty good dancer. And it was nothing really strong, except you get used to somebody after a while.
Yeah.
So when I was sent to Corpus, I didn't know it at the time. They never gave me any instructions on what I was going to be doing. They just said, "You're going there." And I said, "Okay, what am I supposed to do?" "Well, you'll find out when you get there." So I didn't know at the time that they were grooming me to be with the T-45 airplane, which was going to be a new trainer
Right.
that we were just starting to build.
And that was a Douglas plane, or
It was a British airplane that we were converting it to American standards with tail hook and all that sort of stuff. Carrier operations. So it was smaller than the A4. It had twin engines, two small engines,
That was a great little plane.
and they're using it now.
Yeah.
But they don't feel as good about that as they did about the A4. I don't know if they're still building those, but anyhow.
Doesn't the Air Force use those too? No, that's a T-38.
No, they don't. The Air Force doesn't. But anyhow, my job there in Corpus Christi was, if I'd only realized I could have I could have lived in Corpus Christi, but they didn't tell me I could do that.
Well, why would you need their permission?
Huh?
Why would you need their permission?
I didn't need their permission. I just didn't know that I was going to be the head representative for the new airplane
Right.
at Corpus Christi. And I went there, and there were a couple of guys already working with Douglas Aircraft Company at the office. And I went there and one day, and I had been in Kingsville maybe about 5 months, and they said, "Oh yeah, Jim, we just got the word that it's going to be about 8 years before this airplane gets here."
8 years.
And I thought, "Whoa,
What are you gonna
am I
do?"
doing here?
Yeah.
I'm not going to just twiddle my thumbs
For 8 years.
and live in Kingsville." Excuse me. So I decided, okay, that's when I'm going to retire. And I
And
was,
how old were you then?
oh, jeez, I don't know. That was 1975, 76. I guess I was.
No, it couldn't have been 70.
No.
86.
No,
86.
86, yeah.
So 1986.
Wait a minute. I left.
30 years ago. You're 90
I
now.
left Gitmo in 83. I left Gitmo in 83.
Okay.
And so it was 1983 when I was decided to retire. And I just said, hey, things aren't going the way I expected. And I can't go back to the blues because Dale was entrenched by that time. And he's probably a lot smarter than I was on the electronics, and I know he was. So I think he made himself indispensable.
That's what you do, right?
Yeah. And he was good. He was a good guy. I like Dale a lot. It's funny.
So that was
But anyway,
80.
that was 83 that
So
I
you were
made the
closer to
decision.
60. You're probably 58.
Well,
Yeah. 83. You're 58.
I was born in 1927.
You're 90 today, right?
90
It's
today.
2017. Subtract 30 years. Right?
Yeah.
So you're about 58.
58, somewhere around there. And
Ish.
ish, yeah, 58-ish, somewhere around there. So then I decided, okay, what am I going to do? And I said, okay, Polly really wants to get married. So, I kind of like her, and so I decided I'd marry her. And so she came to see me. Oh no, I know what happened. I went to Gitmo for Thanksgiving dinner at Ed Lohman's house on the cliff, and coming out of there with Polly, it was dark. There was no lights, and there was a lot of coral there, and there was one big coral rock. It was like a big ball, and I stepped on it, and I fell, and I rolled right over on top of Polly, and her ankle went like that, so her foot was off to the side. I said, "Oh my God!" And I couldn't tell at the time, and I didn't realize that she couldn't walk. And so about that time, Ed came out again, and he looked at it. He had a flashlight, and he looked at it. And he said, "Oh my God, we got to take her to the hospital." So we did, and this is Thanksgiving of '83, and so
And this was where?
this was in Gitmo.
In Gitmo.
I had gone back to Gitmo to take care of a few things that I had to do, and also of course to see Polly,
Right.
and then and have Thanksgiving dinner with Ed Lohman and
Right.
Dorothy
Okay.
Rappel.
And he was the.
He ran the ran the electrical plant, the desalinization plant.
Right.
He was an expert on desalinization all over the world. He did it in Saudi Arabia and
Osmosis was his
yeah.
thing.
And in California, that was before the osmosis thing.
Yeah.
But the one they had at Gitmo was strictly steam,
Uh-huh.
and so you
Heat it up.
heat the water up, and just recapture the steam, and then you got fresh water.
Right.
So anyhow, after we got to the hospital, it just so happened that there was a doctor there who had wrist capabilities, and so he understood ankle also. And so he fixed her up and said, "Okay, you're going to Norfolk tomorrow." Really? Yeah, there's an airplane leaving, and you're going to be on it. And so she got on the airplane with me. I got on the airplane with her. We went to the hospital, and they took care of it and fixed her foot. And from that point on, she had to recuperate. And so I was going back to Corpus Christi, and she said, well, is it okay if I go with you? And I said, sure, let's go down there, and while we're there, we'll get married. Well, here she is on crutches and big cast on one foot. And some friends that we had known in Gitmo were living at Corpus Christi. And so we got a hold of them, and here comes this friend, this woman, with a big cast on her left foot. And here's the two of them standing there in front of the Justice of the Peace, and he wanted to let us know that his family had been in Corpus Christi for 200 years. He was not a wetback.
That's the only thing.
And he was a JP. So anyhow, that was pretty cool. And we had a little friend, Artie Platt, who had been at Gitmo as a pilot, and he came to Corpus flying, and so he took pictures and all that sort of stuff, and he set all this up. What we were really going to do at first was to go to Dallas, where Larry had set it up in a church for us to get married, and had all that kind of stuff arranged. And the night before we were supposed to go, there was a big ice storm, and the airplanes weren't going anywhere.
Right.
So then plan B was to go down to it was a restaurant in a boat on at Corpus Christi. I guess it was the Gulf, maybe. Yeah, it must have been the Gulf. And so that's why we got married, was in this boat.
Uh-huh.
And not too many people there with us. But anyhow, so then after that, I had already decided I was going to retire. And so I got in touch with the factory, and I said, I'm going back to Gitmo. I'm married. And
So is your intention to go back? Yeah.
well, the intention was because Polly had to go back to work.
Yeah, that's right.
And so I said, okay, I'm going with you. And I went to, we got on an airplane in Norfolk and went back to Guantanamo. And before I could even get on the airplane, there was a guy who was a commander at Gitmo, and I don't know what his job was, but he and I had a little falling out back in Gitmo because I didn't like some of the things he was doing. And so, it was just very crude. And so they were trying to get me scheduled to go at Norfolk, and he said, he's persona non grata, he can't come. And he thought I was still single. And so as soon as I let it be known that I was married, oh yeah, okay. He couldn't stop me then.
Right.
See? So went back, and we got a house right away, and I was there for 6 months before Polly got
In
transfer.
fact, what'd you do for 6 months?
Well, I worked on a couple of projects. One was some of the contractors there had some big projects, and one of them was refrigeration and things like that, HVAC. And so I took a job for $1,000 to go inspect all of the big coolers and refrigerators and all the major air conditioning units
Right.
on the base. There's a bunch of them. I took pictures and, of why this needed to be replaced, why that one needed to be replaced. And that's what they needed,
Yeah.
just to justify getting the contract.
Right.
So they got the contract to replace everything. And a lot of it's pretty bad because of the salt air environment. So it was on top of buildings, and it was a kind of a fun thing to do. And of course I took other little things to do. And while I was there, I forgot to tell you. In the 9 years, that made up the 9 years. In the earlier years, I was president of the Navy League there in Gitmo.
I remember that.
And so, were you there when I was
Yeah.
president?
Mhm.
Okay. And so we set up a lot of different programs, like shipmates ashore. When a ship would come in, we'd have big barbecue, roast pigs and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
And we practically owned what they call an abandoned bar, which was the Barrel Club. It's a huge place, really neat. And so we used that for all our meetings and for having these parties for the ships, and the Sea Cadets would help. And we did a lot of stuff like that. In Gitmo, geez, there's so many things that happened in Guantanamo.
Yeah.
And Jack Fetterman had asked me to set up that Sea Cadet program. So that's one time, I don't know if I mentioned it to you, but we're looking for money to get uniforms for the kids and books and all that sort of stuff. And a lot of that stuff we can get free from boot camp, where people go through boot camp and then decide they don't want to be a sailor, or they flunk out or whatever. And so those clothes and things were put back in storage, and we can get that free for the Sea Cadets. So anyhow, I had a meeting one time at the Chiefs Club, CPO Club, and I invited all the contractors there. And I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to try to get some funding for these programs. And so this one guy, Vern Jensen, was running one of the contracts, and he said, hey, I'll give you $500. This other guy, Dave Cook, said, I'll give you $1,000. I thought, whoa, what's all this?
We're on to something here.
Yeah. And so, it would build up. We had several $1,000s to play with. And, they were anxious to be part of the program.
Sure.
So one of Vern Jensen's workers, one of his kind of an assistant, I can't remember his name, but he was not the brightest, not the sharpest tack in the box, but he wanted to be in the Sea Cadets as an officer. I already had made Holly a lieutenant junior grade, and I was lieutenant commander. I picked that.
A little nepotism there too with Polly, yeah.
Yeah, right. So anyhow, that was when we first got together in '79 and set that up. So anyhow, this guy insisted he wanted to be a full lieutenant. he didn't want to be junior grade. He wanted to be senior grade. So I said,
Make him a
okay.
general.
And then somebody came to me and said, you made that guy a full lieutenant, and Polly's only a lieutenant junior grade, and she's doing all the work. So, I had to change that. There's so many things that happen,
Politics.
So anyhow, people kept giving us sailboats, the little sunfish.
Yeah.
I love those sunfish. And so I had
It's a
four.
great place to sail there.
It's wonderful. And all the kids got a chance to learn to sail. And I had 4 sailboats, and they were supposed to take care of them. And in fact, they were supposed to do a lot of things that I was so busy with airplanes, I didn't really watch to see what they were doing half the time.
Right.
But we had one little girl who, I don't know if I mentioned it to her. Her last name is Garcia, and she was her father had come off the Cuban side and was in exile onto the base, and so he was working on the base, and he was mean. He was mean to his daughter, and he was always giving her a hard time. She was about 13 or 14 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And so I decided, I'm going to help this kid. And I said, okay, I've got a bugle here that this full lieutenant had given us because his son had owned that trumpet, and he got killed in a motorcycle accident. So Chet, his name was, Chet said, okay, we're going to present this at the inauguration of the squadron, of the council, or whatever, what would they call that? Division, the Guantanamo Division of the Sea Cadets, and which we had a big parade on the Marine site. And so he presents this trumpet. And I had already gotten this little girl, Garcia, to practice on the trumpet so she could be the bugler. And her father was still ugly to her, but he was starting to look, And so then later on, this is just a story about her. Later on, we went to boot camp, and we sent all the kids to boot camp. It was about 30 of them, and in Orlando. And she was named the top sailor in the boot camp.
Wow.
And so when she came back, there was a prize for anybody who got that. And she came back, and her father, all of a sudden, he loved her. and she, the prize was she got flying lessons.
Wow.
In one of Ed Loman's airplanes. And so I've got a picture of her sitting in the airplane getting her first instructions. I want to tell you, it's just little things like that happen all the time.
Right.
And
Make life worthwhile.
yeah, it did. It really did. But there's so many things about Guantanamo that were just unique in all the world.
Yeah.
Because
beautiful place.
well, there were only 6,000 people in the whole island.
A small
a
town.
whole. Well, we called us an island, isolated, but Guantanamo Bay was 45 square miles, and this big bay in the middle, and a little island over here, Hospital K, where they used to send all the people with TB and various contagious diseases or something like that. But anyhow, the Guantanamo Bay itself led into another bay through a narrow area, upper bay, where the Cubans were.
Right.
And there were a set of 6 fences around the perimeter of Guantanamo. And we only put up one fence, but the Cubans put up 5 on their side. And the idea was not to keep us out, but to keep their people in. And so their people were trying to escape all the time. Those, oh boy. Jeez, Mark, so many things happened in Guantanamo. There were when I got there were 500 people coming onto the base to work every day. 500 people.
From Cuba.
From Cuba.
Right.
And they would come through a tunnel, Northeast Gate. They come through a tunnel.
How did the Cuban government, how did they put up with that? Why didn't they just starve you out?
They couldn't.
Well, I know, but why would they, letting those people on the base there just sort of help you out?
All right, this is to answer that question. Number one, of course, we had all the supplies coming in by ship, everything, and we had a lot of workers needed for labor force that had some intelligence and capability. The basic labor force was Jamaican. There's 1,000 of those on the base. Other than that, there were maybe 400 or 500 that were locked in when the gates were closed, in 1959 or 60. I can't remember exactly. And and the reason for that, of course, as you probably have heard, Castro had defeated Batista,
Right.
and they were looking for help from the United States to get the government going again, and the United States declined. Why? I don't know. So then they went to Russia and got the communist help, and so that made it solid that they were going to be communist, and that's a basic tenet right there. Anyhow, and I was telling you about the 500 people that were coming into the base every day to work and go out. And the story I heard was that they'd come into the tunnel, take off all their clothes, leave them there, walk through the tunnel, put on their work clothes in the American side, and then they could go through. So, and the objective was they couldn't take anything out of Cuba.
Right.
And when they went back, it was just the reverse of that. And the only thing they could take back with them was the money that they earned.
Right.
And so the 10% was what they got out of the money they earned. And that was more than anybody else in their villages was getting.
Mm-hmm.
And so they felt rich.
Yeah.
And the Cuban government would say, okay, we're going to save this for you. But they didn't. They never got it back, I don't think. So I met some of these guys who had been exiled because, and they told me, these two brothers told me that they don't dare go back on the other side because they'd be killed.
Right.
So, and that apparently happened to a number of them. So it was, it was kind of tenuous.
Right.
A lot of things were kind of a little bit scary, but as far as they were concerned, they had a pretty damn good deal.
Right.
Compared to the rest of the Cubans.
Right.
So there's one story that there are a lot of stories about Cubans trying to get out and swimming down the river and getting shot by the Cubans, by the Cuban guards down the Guantanamo River, trying to get onto the base. There were, on our side, why didn't they go over the fences? Okay, on our side, we had mines set up. We had a minefield all the way around on our side of the fence, and there were 40,000 mines planted. And every once in a while, a deer would go over there and get blown up, something like that. They were not set up for that. Once in a while, it would happen because deers were only about a big dog. But the people, if you step on one, you're gone. And that happened when they go to maintain the mine and they miscalculate where the mines were buried. And all of a sudden, the guy's gone, And it happened to a master sergeant in the Marine Corps who was maintaining the mines. So, some of the, I was telling you about people coming down the Guantanamo River. Occasionally, one or two of them would get through, and so they would go to get some support. They were exiled, not exiled, but refugees, and so immediately at the Naval Air Station, which is close to where the Guantanamo River empties into the bay, close to the Naval Air Station, somebody would be aware because the Marines on our side of the fence would alert them. They'd come and get the guys and take them clandestinely at night, to a holding place, and you'd hear airplanes taking off in the middle of the night. They're heading to Miami, and that's what they did with them. And so they took care of them that way.
Right.
And of course they debrief them when they got to Miami. They debrief them right there and get them on then again in Miami. Well, a friend of mine decided that he had a little girlfriend, and her name was, I can't remember her name. And she was third class petty officer who was working in the BOQ, and all the guys the officers lived in the bachelor officers' quarters, and the teachers who were bachelors lived in the BOQ. And so the principal of the high school, Frank Andrews, was there, and he had been divorced from his wife.
Okay. Go ahead.
So Frank Andrews and I were pretty good friends. By the way, his brother was Zeke Cormier, his half-brother, had been one of the Blue Angels bosses in the early days. And so that was our connection at first. That's why I started hanging out with Frank. One weekend, he decided that he liked this little girl who was hanging around, working in the office at the bachelor officers' quarters, and he was in love with her. He was about 55, and she was maybe 21, and she was married to a sailor who lived there, and she was a sailor. So, but he said, "Jim, you gotta know this girl." And I said, "Frank, I really don't want to know her." He said, "Oh yeah, but she's so wonderful, and I just want you to get to know her. So Sunday, I'm gonna get a barrel boat, and we're gonna I've got a big bucket of pina coladas that I'm gonna take, and we'll just go out and it'll get a chance for you to get to know her." And I said, "I don't know, Frank." So he went out anyhow one Sunday, and the next thing I know, Jack Fetterman, who was a base commander at that time, came to me. He says, "Jim, what do you know about Frank Andrews?" And I said, "Why? What's the matter, Jack?" And he said, "Well, he was in a barrel boat." And I said, "Yeah, he told me he was going to go out and take a little girl with him, and just be out there for the afternoon. He said, yeah, well, he went up the Guantanamo River, and we just got word that they've captured him. Oh, shit. Oh, boy. And here he is. I get the word later, and by this time, it's an international incident.
Yeah.
And Jack is desperately trying to find out what's going on, and find out where's the barrel boat, and he figures if I can get the barrel boat back, maybe I can get Frank back.
Maybe we don't want him back.
So, and he was negotiating with the Cubans on the other side, and they wouldn't tell him anything except that he was being held with this young lady, and in their bathing suits in different houses around Caminero, and this little town outside the gate. So they wouldn't really give him any solid information, and they would not bring him back. They said that he has to be interrogated, and they're thinking of sending him to Havana to get official interrogation. And so Jack said, okay, listen, we'll pay for the boat to get it back, and we'll pay you to send Frank and this little sailor back. And so they wouldn't do it. And ultimately the boat did come back, and it was full of holes where they had shot holes into it. And anyhow, we finally got the word through Jack Fetterman that they were on an airplane going back to Miami. I have no idea how he arranged that, but Jack was just a wonderful guy. He's just he knew how to talk with people and get them to understand the situation and get their cooperation.
Yeah.
So he was able to do that. And so it was not too long after that, I was in Pensacola, and I just happened to see Frank. And I said, Frank, what are you doing in Pensacola? Oh, yeah, well, this is where the headquarters is, and I'm just for the Department of Defense schools. So as it turns out, Frank was sent back up there to be kind of like, you don't go anywhere, Frank. You're going to stay right here in Pensacola.
Keep an eye on it.
Yeah, we're going to keep an eye on it. So I can't remember where I saw him, where I bumped into him, but it was on the street somewhere. And so we went and had a couple of beers or something, maybe to Trader John's, and he's telling me this story and about, oh, Jim, you wouldn't, and he's a great storyteller, you wouldn't believe what happened. We're in this boat, in this barrel boat, and we had been drinking these pina coladas, and all of a sudden I hear gunshots, and so I'm sitting there at the wheel of the steering, and I jump off and I push the girl down on the deck, and I jump on top of her, and I say, hit the deck. Frank, you did? Hit the deck. Okay. That's what he told me. and
Turned out to be the hero of the story.
Yeah, and he said, they finally took us up to a place they wouldn't tell us where we were. They wouldn't do anything. And here we are in our bathing suits, sitting in a corner of a room, and people would come in, and they'd bring in some kind of a dignitary, and they'd look at us, and they'd talk to each other, and once in a while somebody would speak in English, but we couldn't get any sense out of them. And then he was telling me about they were going from house to house to house to house, and why?
Yeah.
Nobody knew. He didn't know, but they just kept going. And every time they went to a different house, all these people would show up and want to look at them.
Right.
And then when they went to Havana, they were still in their bathing suits. Can you imagine that?
Yeah.
And so they get on the airplane. I think it was Eastern Airlines that he told me. They get on the airplane, and the stewardesses felt sorry for them. They put them up front where they could take care of them and give them blankets, and because they were still in their bathing suits.
Somebody couldn't give him some clothes?
I don't know. I guess not. That's what he told me, anyhow.
Mm-hmm.
So, but Frank was a good storyteller. I knew Frank, and he was very colorful. I mean, he's a very handsome guy, big guy,
Mm-hmm.
and just a nice guy, very smart. But anyhow, he wound up back in Pensacola, and then they decided they were going to send him. By the way, the sailor was put in the brig, the girl.
Yeah.
She was put in the brig, and I don't know what happened to her, but I think she was drummed out of the Navy.
Mm-hmm.
Because it had become such a big international incident. And so here's Frank wondering, okay, what are they going to do to me? And then he said, oh, they're going to send me to England. And so they did. Strangely.
You met him there.
Yes. Strangely. He was sent to the same school that Polly was sent to, Lake and Heath High School. And he became not the principal, but the manager of the dormitory, because a lot of kids from all over England were going to that high school, and so they had to have a place to live. So so he was the dorm monitor, and so anyhow, that's where we bumped into him again, because that summer. After we were leaving Guantanamo, that's where we were going, the airplanes. We used to see MiGs flying over the base. Yeah, a lot of them. There'd be 2 or 3 of them at a time, and every day at a certain time, you'd see these MiGs circling around base, and like they were monitoring what we were doing.
Yeah.
And so the MiGs would fly away, and our guys once in a while would go up and do something, but it didn't scare them. They just kept coming. So then we decided, okay, we're going to put a stop to this, because that's a little scary, because we don't know whether they're armed or what they're going to be doing. Mm-hmm. And so we decided, okay, I found out we could put sidewinders on that airplane, because even though it was a trainer, it had the same wiring that the A4 attack airplanes had. Mm-hmm. And so it took a while to get permission, and it was only 6 wires that had to be installed in that. When we finally got permission to do it, and we rigged one airplane and got a couple of sidewinders, and the commanding officer, McGilvery, decided he was going to be the guy that was going to test them. So we had one area alongside the bay that was called High Cackle. It was kind of a desert area, and that's where they did a lot of the bombing, practice bombing. So he takes off with these 2 sidewinders, and just about the time these MiGs are supposed to be coming over, and he decides, okay, I'm going to wait till I see something happening, and then I'm going to launch them. And launches them down to High Cackle. Never saw another MiG. All of a sudden, they didn't feel very comfortable. So
What kind of MiGs were they? 21s?
I don't know. I don't know what they were. I never saw them myself,
Right.
but MiG-19s maybe,
Probably.
because they were older versions. But that was a funny thing. I had to tell you about that one. Beaches.
Yeah, they had beautiful beaches over there.
Oh my
right?
God! You know about the
Yeah,
beaches
we went
and
scuba diving.
scuba diving and one time, you spearfish or you gig langosta, the lobster, the spiny lobster, and sometimes you go out at night with a light in the water and you see these two red dots. That's the lobster. Were you on one of those?
I don't remember seeing any of the lobsters. I remember you talking about them, but I do remember diving there, and I do remember how much coral and fish you had there. It was pretty amazing.
My God, it's fascinating. Yeah. It was a whole nother world.
It was. It's beautiful.
Just even if you were
undisturbed.
just skin diving or snorkeling,
Right.
you didn't even have to have a
Yeah, you didn't
tank.
really need a tank. You could snorkel and do it.
Of course, there was one time that I was out with one of the guys, one of the lieutenant commanders who was a pilot with the squadron, and we were scuba diving out, going over the slot. I mean, there was a precipice that went down to 6,000 feet,
Right.
and you go out maybe a quarter of a mile from the beach, and the drop-off would happen, and you'd be down at 100 feet.
Right.
And so, I never went more than 100 feet down. And so we went down to about 105 to look at the face of the cliff, and see if we couldn't find some coral, black coral, because it seemed to grow on the face of that rock, yeah. And I had seen some before. Some of the guys would have brought it back. But then Glenn saw a grouper, and he decided he wanted to have that grouper, so he shot it. And I just happened to have the bag, so I was the bag man. And he puts the grouper in this yellow net bag, and I said, "Hey, that's pretty cool. This is about a 10-pound grouper." And it was pretty big. And so I've got the grouper, and we're swimming back to the shore. And when you're scuba diving, you have to come up gradually. Yeah. So